The village lay between golden hills and whispering trees, where laughter carried easily across the fields and gossip traveled faster than the wind. It was a place known for its beauty, bright mornings filled with birdsong, evenings of orange glow, and people whose tongues never rested. Beneath this calm rhythm of daily life lived a young woman whose name was spoken in both pity and ridicule. She had hands that once healed, soft and gentle, but marked with scars that told a story no one truly cared to understand. The villagers called her the girl with wounded palms, pretending to pity her, though their eyes gleamed with judgment whenever she passed. She moved through life quietly, her footsteps light on the red earth, her head bowed but her spirit unbroken. Her scars came from a fire long ago, one that had claimed her parents and left her as a reminder of that tragedy. People said she was cursed, born from ashes, touched by something unholy. Yet, when children scraped their knees or animals were found wounded, she was the first to tend to them, her hands glowing faintly in the sunlight, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. Those she helped felt warmth spread through them, but when she turned away, the same people would whisper that her kindness came from guilt, not grace. Every market day she would walk past rows of traders selling yams, beads and palm oil, her woven basket swinging gently by her side. She never raised her eyes when the others laughed or mocked her gait. Look, some would say, the girl with the burned hands thinks she can touch blessings without being cursed again. Others would giggle behind their calabashes, pretending her very shadow carried misfortune. But she never answered. Instead, she would give her last coin to a beggar, offer her water to a thirsty child and keep moving. She had learned that silence was a stronger shield than words. The elders, old enough to remember the night of the fire, sometimes spoke softly when she passed. There is something in her, one would mutter, something not of this world. She carries pain the way rivers carry secrets. The younger villagers ignored such warnings. They saw only her scars, red, uneven, reminders of imperfection in a world obsessed with beauty. And in their laughter they believed they were powerful, for cruelty was a sport that needed no strength. Yet even as they laughed, strange things began to happen. The woman's garden bloomed when others withered. The injured animals she nursed healed faster than expected. At night, when the moon hung low and silver, some swore they saw her sitting by the riverbank, speaking softly to the water as if it answered her back. Others said they saw faint lights flickering around her, like fireflies that refused to leave her side. Still she remained humble, kind and distant. Her scars did not define her spirit, they only deepened the quiet mystery that surrounded her. Beneath her calm exterior lay something ancient, a sorrow so deep it had begun to stir in the unseen places of the world. The wind carried whispers that the earth itself had begun to notice her pain. And though the villagers laughed louder to drown the discomfort in their hearts, even they could not ignore the way the air changed when she passed by, heavy, electric, and waiting. It began with laughter, not the gentle kind that warms the soul, but the sharp, cruel sound that cuts like a blade. The villagers no longer whispered behind her back, they mocked her openly now. Children imitated her walk, pretending to clutch their hands as if burned, stumbling in exaggerated agony while the adults chuckled. Women at the river washing clothes would whisper loud enough for her to hear, saying, "Those scars are not from fire, they are punishment. No one suffers like that without cause." Men laughed, shaking their heads. If she were pure, they said, the spirits would have healed her long ago. Her scars became the village's entertainment. At the market, when she reached for goods, the sellers would pull their baskets away, pretending to protect them from contamination. Some would throw coins at her feet instead of handing them to her, muttering, "Keep your cursed hands away." The laughter always followed, quick, sharp, and full of venom. Even those who once showed her kindness began to avoid her. No one wanted to share her burden, for pain in their eyes was contagious. At home the loneliness grew heavier. Her small hut stood at the edge of the village, near the whispering forest, where the wind often howled through the night. Once, her aunt had visited, bringing food and stories to comfort her. But now even she came no more. The girl's presence had become a shadow others feared to touch. Her neighbors began crossing the path when she approached, clutching charms or murmuring prayers beneath their breath. It was as though her wounds had become eyes, not yet seen, not yet known, that made them uneasy without understanding why. One evening as she sat by her door, the laughter echoed again from afar. A group of young women returning from the river had seen her watching the sunset. "Look," one of them sneered, "she thinks she's still beautiful. Maybe she waits for the spirits to take her reflection." Another added with mock sweetness, "Perhaps she waits for a man brave enough to hold fire in his arms." Their laughter rippled through the air like poison, filling her chest with quiet pain. She did not respond. Her lips remained sealed, her eyes distant. But inside her heart, something began to shift, a tightening, a quiet hardening. She was tired of explaining, tired of begging the world to see beyond the surface of her skin. Every cruel word, every burst of laughter became a spark that burned low and slow in the pit of her soul. That night she did not sleep. She sat in the dark, listening to the whisper of crickets, the sigh of trees and the rhythm of her own breath. Her hands lay open on her lap, the scars catching the faint light of the moon. They pulsed softly like embers under ash. For the first time she noticed the faint warmth emanating from them, not the sting of old pain but something alive. The next day she spoke even less. When people mocked her, she merely looked at them, her gaze steady and unervingly calm. Her silence unnerved them. There was power in it, not defiance, not rage but something colder, more patient. The laughter around her grew strained. Some began to look away when she passed, uneasy but unwilling to admit why. She no longer wept at night. Instead, she watched the flickering shadows on her wall, her thoughts growing deep and strange. Somewhere within her, grief had begun to ferment into something else. Not hatred yet, but the quiet recognition that no one, not even the kindest heart, could survive endless cruelty without changing. And as she gazed at her hands in the moonlight, the faint pulse beneath her scars seemed to whisper to her, steady and soft, "They will see soon." Even as the village continued its relentless chatter, mocking her at every turn, she learned to hide her wounds beneath long sleeves and tightly woven cloth. Her arms, once bare under the sun, now remained veiled, as if the fabric could protect her not only from eyes but from the very cruelty that hung in the air. Yet hiding them did not dull their presence. Every scar pulsed softly, an invisible heartbeat that resonated with the wrongs done around her. When someone told a lie, when a neighbor gossiped or a merchant cheated, the scars throbbed in subtle rhythm, almost as if they were alive, responding to the untruths and malice around her. She had grown used to hiding her hands, keeping her head lowered and moving quickly from place to place, but the scars had a memory of their own. At night, when the village slept, she would examine them, feeling the heat that rose beneath her skin when dishonesty or cruelty passed nearby. It was a strange sensation, not entirely painful but insistent, commanding her attention. It was as though the scars themselves were witnesses, carrying a silent record of every insult, every slight, every act of unkindness that the villagers inflicted upon her or others. Her solitude deepened, for no one could see what she was beginning to feel. Even her closest companions, those few who had once shown her kindness, could not perceive the quiet tension simmering beneath her skin. And she did not speak of it, for words could not capture the strange language of the scars, the pulsing, the subtle heat that sometimes made her fingers tingle and her chest tighten. She began to wonder if the old stories the elders whispered by the fire were true, tales of ancestors who watched over their descendants in secret, who granted powers to those who suffered unjustly, if only they endured with patience and quiet dignity. The village itself seemed unaware that something ancient was stirring in her. When disputes arose between neighbors, when the children quarreled over a scrap of food, the air near her seemed to shift. The wind would brush her hair across her face, the leaves would quiver on the trees, and she could feel a subtle pulse beneath her skin as if the earth itself acknowledged the injustices. She did not yet understand the force that awakened inside her, only that it was patient and slow, like a river carving a path through stone. Each day she moved through the village, keeping her scars hidden, but the tension around her thickened. People spoke of unease, an inexplicable feeling that eyes were upon them, though none could see who or what observed. Those who had laughed openly at her found themselves glancing over shoulders more often, hesitating to speak the cruel words that once spilled freely. The villagers could not explain why, only that a quiet power lingered where she walked. She herself was beginning to listen differently to the world. The wind carried not only the scent of the earth but subtle whispers. The rustling of the trees sounded almost like cautionary advice, the shifting of the river beneath the bridge seemed to murmur secrets. And beneath it all, her wounds pulsed and throbbed in recognition of every misdeed, marking a tally that no one else could see. There was a strange satisfaction in this quiet reckoning, a sense that even in suffering she was not powerless. Something ancient had stirred in her, something that could wait and watch, gathering knowledge and patience until the moment it would no longer be silent. And so, she walked the village streets with her head bowed, her scars hidden, her gaze thoughtful, and the first hints of something greater stirring beneath her skin, a force both patient and unyielding, waiting for the right time to make the hidden power of her wounds known to the world. That night, the village lay quiet beneath a blanket of stars, the only sounds the soft rustle of leaves and the distant croak of frogs. She stepped lightly from her hut, carrying the weight of the day's insults, the laughter that had pierced her heart, and the constant throb of her hidden wounds. She found herself at the edge of the village, where the open field met the dark silhouette of the forest, and there she knelt, hands clasped, eyes lifted to the luminous moon. The pale light bathed her face and fell across her scarred arms, and for the first time in many days she allowed herself to breathe fully, unafraid of judgment. "Moon," she whispered, her voice trembling yet steady, "I do not ask for vengeance, not yet. I ask for peace in my heart, for guidance, for the strength to endure." The air seemed to listen. The gentle wind brushed her hair back from her face, cool and comforting as if acknowledging her plea. And then, as if responding, the moonlight shifted, falling directly upon her scars. They began to shimmer faintly, a soft glow that traced each line and mark like rivers of silver flowing over her skin. The sensation was subtle but undeniable. The scars felt alive like tiny embers of something greater. Her tears, which she had held so long, fell quietly to the earth, and where they landed, faint ripples of light appeared, vanishing as quickly as they came, yet leaving her with a sense that the night had heard her. The wind carried faint whispers, almost like voices at the edge of hearing, gentle and patient, urging her to hold fast to her strength. She did not fully understand the messages, but she felt them in her chest, a resonance that mingled with the pulse of her wounds. She remained there for hours, kneeling beneath the moon, speaking softly to it as she would have spoken to a dear friend. Her heart, though heavy with sorrow, began to feel lighter, for she sensed a presence, something ancient, something protective, acknowledging her suffering. And though she had asked only for peace, a subtle warmth spread across her scars, a promise that those who had caused harm would not escape the reckoning that her patience and endurance would one day demand. When she finally rose, the moonlight had shifted again, falling gently across the village rooftops, and she walked back home with her steps quieter, her spirit steadier. The scars on her arms no longer felt merely like reminders of pain. They seemed to hum softly with life, a silent testament that the night had witnessed her plea and that the quiet power within her had begun to stir, awakening under the careful gaze of the moon. Night had deepened over the village, and the young woman lay restless in her hut, unable to sleep. The echoes of laughter, the cruel jibes, and the whispered rumors of the day haunted her still, but now something new stirred beneath her skin. She had noticed it the previous evening, under the gentle glow of the moon, when her scars had shimmered faintly. Tonight that shimmer had returned, and it was different. There was a subtle movement, as if the lines of her wounds were breathing, pulsing with a life of their own. Tentatively she reached out her hand, fingers trembling. Her heart thumped in her chest, a mix of fear and awe. And then she saw it. The scars began to shift, tiny eyelids forming along the ridges and hollows of each mark. Slowly an eye blinked, delicate but unmistakably alive. Her breath caught in her throat. She recoiled, clutching her arms across her chest, unsure whether she was witnessing a miracle or a curse. The eyes were small, barely larger than the tip of a finger, yet they were aware, watching, observing. At first, she feared what the villagers would say if they could see her now. Would they call her a witch? A spirit? She shivered under the weight of the unknown. But then in the quiet she began to hear something subtle. A whisper, soft yet persistent, like the sigh of wind through trees. The voice seemed to come from the eyes themselves. "We see what is done in cruelty. We see what is hidden." The words sent a shiver down her spine, yet did not frighten her completely. There was a strange comfort in their presence. The eyes had been born from her suffering, yes, but now they carried purpose. Every moment of mockery, every harsh word, every glance of disdain from the villagers had been noted, recorded by the silent witnesses that now peered softly from her skin. Her wounds, once sources of shame and pain, had become vigilant guardians, attuned to the injustices in her village. She moved cautiously through the small room, watching the eyes blink with intelligence. One on her forearm shifted to look at another on her wrist, and they seemed to communicate silently, their gaze aware of every corner of the hut. It was as if a network of sentience had grown quietly from her suffering, each scar now a sentinel, each eye a witness to cruelty, deceit, and lies. Fear mingled with awe. She feared what this power might demand of her, what it might compel her to do. Yet she also sensed that it had not arisen to harm innocence. The whispers continued, repeating a singular truth: "We watch. We remember. Justice will come to those who deserve it." Her heart steadied. The fire that had smoldered quietly within her began to stir, a pulse of determination amplified by the watchful eyes embedded in her very being. The following days she walked the village streets as before, keeping her arms mostly hidden beneath loose sleeves, yet always aware of the eyes beneath the fabric, observing. Every lie spoken around her caused a subtle stir, a shift of focus as if each eye leaned in, noting the offense. Every act of cruelty echoed faintly within her mind, not as torment, but as record, as proof that the world would not forget what had been done. At night she no longer feared the eyes. She whispered to them, softly, as though speaking to confidants who understood her suffering. See, remember. Wait. The eyes blinked, responding not with words but with a gentle pulse, a recognition that her command was heard. They would not move without her permission, yet they had awakened with a singular purpose: to witness, to guard, to prepare for the day when the wrongs done in darkness would be brought into the light. And so, she began to accept the transformation. Her wounds, once shameful and sorrowful, had become her greatest allies. They were patient, vigilant, and incorruptible. Through the blink of each eye, the whispers of justice moved quietly across the village, unseen yet potent, ready to act when the moment of reckoning finally arrived. The girl understood in the deep hours of the night that she was no longer merely a victim. She was the keeper of truth, the bearer of silent yet unyielding eyes that would watch forever. As the days passed, the girl grew accustomed to the blinking eyes embedded within her scars, their silent vigilance a constant presence. One quiet afternoon, as the village carried on with its ordinary bustle, she felt a subtle shift within the network of eyes that covered her arms and hands. A warmth spread through her forearm, unlike the soft pulse she had grown used to. It was insistent, drawing her attention outward toward the people moving around her. Tentatively, she raised her arm, and as she did, the eyes within the scars began to shimmer more brightly, their tiny pupils focusing not on the physical world, but on something deeper, hidden beneath the surface of those she knew. She gasped softly, realizing that each eye was revealing the truth of the hearts nearby. A merchant who always wore a smile, courteous and polite, was secretly hoarding coins meant for the poor. A neighbor who offered a friendly handshake concealed bitter jealousy toward her and anyone who succeeded in small tasks. Even children who played innocently in the streets held tiny secrets of cruelty, taking what did not belong to them, whispering insults behind others' backs. It was as if her wounds had become a mirror, reflecting not only the actions but the intentions, the hidden shadows that humans often carried in silence. Her heart trembled at first, the weight of knowing so much was heavy. She had expected the world to be unfair, cruel, even malicious, but seeing it laid bare, unfiltered, was overwhelming. Every glance of envy, every whispered lie, every secret malice pulsed through her like a vivid stream of light and shadow. She realized, slowly, that her suffering had given her this gift. The pain she had endured, the mocking, the ostracism, the deep loneliness, had been transformed into insight. Her wounds, once sources of shame, had become conduits of truth. Each scar whispered to her, revealing what could not be seen with the eyes alone. And in understanding the hidden sins of her village, she also began to understand her own power, the ability to see clearly, to judge not with anger but with knowledge, and to act with precision when the time came. As she moved through the village that day, she noticed things she had never fully understood before. The stepmother who always smiled when she passed was secretly plotting to seize a portion of her late mother's belongings. The village elder, outwardly wise and just, had been turning a blind eye to acts of cruelty for personal gain. Even those who claimed kindness sometimes acted out of self-interest, subtle but potent. Each truth she uncovered did not provoke immediate action. Rather, it built a reservoir of awareness, teaching her patience and control. By evening she returned to her hut and observed her wounds again. The eyes blinked softly, like tiny sentinels, reflecting the light of the dying sun and the shadows of the village's secrets. She whispered to them a quiet acknowledgement: "I see. I understand. I will remember." It was not vengeance yet, nor was it mercy. It was the beginning of knowing, and she understood that knowledge carried immense power. That night, as moonlight bathed her scars and the eyes blinked gently, she realized the full scope of her transformation. Pain had become perception, suffering had become sight, and her wounds were no longer simply reminders of cruelty, they were instruments of truth. Through them, she could see the hearts of others as clearly as one might read the pages of a book, each secret laid bare, each betrayal illuminated. Her tears, her endurance, her silent suffering, they had all contributed to this awakening, turning her body into a mirror of moral clarity, and her spirit into a vessel of unyielding awareness. And so, with each blink of her wound-born eyes, she began to chart the hidden currents of the village's hearts, preparing herself for the reckoning that would come when the world was ready to face the truths she now carried so vividly. At first it began as a whisper, a subtle unease that settled over the village like an invisible fog. People who had once laughed openly at the girl's scars started glancing over their shoulders, startled by shadows that didn't quite behave as they should. The same men and women who mocked her as cursed began to lower their voices in gossip, speaking less boldly as if someone unseen was listening. Mothers who had told their children not to sit near her now clutched those children closer when walking past her hut. The once busy paths around her home grew strangely quiet, as if the earth itself had learned to hold its breath. Those who had tormented her the most noticed it first. When they bent to draw water from the river, their reflections didn't look back as they expected. Instead of their own faces staring up, they caught fleeting glimpses of eyes, dark, unblinking eyes, floating on the surface. The moment they blinked or shook their heads, the image was gone, but the feeling lingered, crawling under their skin. Some claimed they saw the eyes peering from between the roots of the great baobab trees or watching from the mud walls of their huts. Others swore that the night birds called not their names but their sins. As days turned to nights, the fear spread like a fever. The village square, once a place of chatter and laughter, became tense with silence. People began to stumble over their words, afraid their lies might catch the attention of whatever force was haunting them. The women who had mocked the girl's scars now refused to look into mirrors. They covered water jars and shunned polished gourds. Even children, once bold and cruel in their mimicry, cried at night, telling their parents they saw eyes blinking in the shadows of their sleeping mats. Guilt began to claw at their hearts. The stepmother, proud and dismissive, was the most affected of all. She saw eyes everywhere, on the edges of her plates, in the wood grain of the doors, in the flicker of the cooking fire. Each blink felt like a judgment, each stare a reminder of the cruelty she had sown. She began to sleep with the lamps burning, but even then the eyes appeared in the glow of the flames, reflecting her own face twisted with fear. Some villagers tried to explain it away, saying the girl must have cast a spell before she vanished, but others began to whisper of the ancestors, of justice older than memory. They remembered the shimmer of her tears, the heaviness in the air, the strange puddles that refused to dry. They wondered if her pain had awakened something ancient beneath the soil, a power that saw not with human eyes but with the eyes of truth itself. As the days passed, no one dared mock her name aloud. Her absence became more haunting than her presence had ever been. Market sellers would stop mid-sentence, glancing around as if the air itself might judge them. Hunters paused at the edges of the forest, feeling eyes glimmering between the trees though nothing moved. Even the village elder began to fumble his prayers, trembling before his shrine as if the gods themselves were staring through the walls. It wasn't just terror, it was guilt, raw and unrelenting. Those who had been kind felt only a heavy sadness, but those who had laughed at her wounds felt hunted by their own memories. In their minds, they began to replay the moments of cruelty, the mocking words, the harsh looks, the turning away when she needed help, and each memory now burned like a wound of its own. The eyes they saw weren't only hers, they were their own shame, made visible, multiplying across the village. By nightfall, the village no longer felt like a safe, sunlit place but a cage of glances and whispers. No one spoke of it openly but all knew, something had changed. The girl they had wounded might be gone, but her wounds had become eyes that watched them forever, a silent tribunal woven into the very fabric of their world. And the more they tried to ignore those eyes, the more they appeared, in reflections, in shadows, in dreams, until every heartbeat felt like an echo of judgment waiting to fall. The night arrived with a heavy stillness as though the very air held its breath. A low mist rolled in from the river, curling around the huts and paths of the village like ghostly fingers, concealing and revealing in equal measure. It was in this eerie calm that she emerged, the young woman whose wounds had become living eyes, who now carried the weight of justice upon her shoulders. Each scar, once a mark of suffering, now glowed softly, a pale luminescence that cut through the darkness with an unearthly grace. Her hands, her arms, her face, all the places where cruelty had struck her, radiated light that pulsed with her heartbeat, each glow a silent declaration. The time for hidden truths was at hand. As she stepped onto the village path, the glow of her wounds illuminated the night like lanterns that could see into souls. Every leaf, every stone, every wall seemed to reflect her light, but it was not merely illumination of the physical world. It reached further, revealing the inner darkness of those who had wronged her. The first to feel it were the villagers who had mocked her, laughed at her scars, or whispered cruel lies. The soft glow reached them first in their dreams, then in the waking hours, embedding unease deep in their hearts. As she passed, shadows stretched unnaturally, bending toward the truth she carried. Every corner of the village became a mirror for conscience, every shadow a stage for reflection. When she entered the square, the air shifted. A merchant who had cheated customers for years felt the glow ignite behind his eyes, a burn that made him flinch. Mothers who had denied their children kindness in favor of scorned whispers felt their hearts tighten. The stepmother, now pale and trembling, staggered back as her gaze met the luminous eyes embedded in the young woman's scars. Those eyes blinked, not with human hesitation, but with the precision of one who had witnessed every act of malice. Each blink was a silent accusation, each shimmer a revelation of guilt long buried. The villagers gasped as they saw it. Her wounds were not wounds anymore, they were mirrors of truth, magnifying every secret sin, every hidden cruelty, every betrayal that had gone unnoticed. The laughter that had once filled the streets, the teasing cries, the mocking voices, they all stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause in reverence, carrying her glow across the village like a wave of judgment. No one dared look away, for the light did not simply shine. It examined, it accused, it unveiled. She walked slowly, deliberately, allowing the glow from her wounds to touch each home, each family. In one hut, a father who had hidden food from the hungry felt the warmth of her light as a burning brand upon his conscience. In another, a neighbor who had spread lies about her kindness found their own reflection in her glowing scars, their deception laid bare for all to see. It was not physical harm she wrought, but a revelation so complete that it became inescapable. Every liar, every cruel soul, was exposed before the community. Every whispered insult, every secret act of malice, now carried weight beyond their imagining. The stepmother fell to her knees, her hands covering her face, but the glowing eyes followed her, unwavering. She could not escape, could not hide from what she had done. The eyes whispered in the language of the spirits, a language old as the river and the earth, revealing the depth of her envy, the bitterness of her words, the cruelty that had festered for years. Her house, once her sanctuary, now seemed like a cage illuminated by the light of justice. Every corner hid memories of mockery, and now those memories were alive, awakened by the young woman's luminous presence. Even those who had only stood silently by felt their consciences stir. They had not acted, they had not protected, and their inaction now bore witness. The eyes in her wounds did not accuse harshly, they simply reflected, and reflection was often more painful than any punishment. Villagers began to whisper among themselves, voices trembling, realizing that their community had allowed cruelty to flourish unnoticed. The glowing eyes revealed patterns, connections, and truths that none had dared articulate. The laughter at her wounds, the jokes whispered behind closed doors, the small acts of mockery that had accumulated over years. As she moved through the streets, the power of her presence became undeniable. Children who had once mimicked her wounds now cowered in awe, sensing that these were not ordinary marks, but instruments of divine clarity. Even the animals of the village seemed to recognize her authority. Dogs ceased barking, cats crouched silently, and birds perched motionless in the trees. Nature itself acknowledged the shift, as if the very fabric of the village had been aligned to witness this revelation. By midnight, the entire village was gathered, drawn as if by the pull of destiny. Her light filled the square, and the once hidden sins of the community were displayed with unerring precision. The stepmother, the merchants, the neighbors, none could hide from the truth. The glowing scars did not merely shine, they spoke in subtle movements, tiny pulses of light that conveyed accusation, remembrance, and the inevitability of justice. Every heart quivered in response. Laughter, once a weapon, had transformed into silence. Mockery had become awe, cruelty had been mirrored back as fear. The girl's eyes, too, glowed faintly, merging with the light of her wounds, and she lifted her hands slowly, as if conducting the illumination that revealed all secrets. The village understood, finally, that the wounds they had ridiculed were not weakness but power. They had created a force they could neither defy nor ignore. The night became a living testament. The cruelty that had been ignored, laughed at, and dismissed was now fully visible, and those who had enacted it faced their own consciences in stark, unflinching clarity. And as the young woman walked to the edge of the square, leaving trails of glowing light in her wake, the villagers felt the weight of revelation settle upon them. Every liar, every cruel soul, every hidden betrayer had been exposed, and the village would never be the same. Silence reigned where laughter had lived, and trembling replaced mockery. The night had become a mirror, reflecting the truth of the hearts within it, and the girl with gentle hands, whose wounds had once been mocked, now commanded the village with a quiet, radiant authority that would be remembered for generations. The village woke to an eerie stillness, as though the very earth itself held its breath. The young woman, whose wounds had transformed into living eyes, returned once more, moving deliberately through the streets and alleys where cruelty had once flourished. The glow from her scars was no longer just light, it carried intention. Each eye blinked with awareness, each shimmer pulsed with the weight of judgment. The innocent felt a gentle warmth, a quiet acknowledgement that their hearts had remained untainted. The guilty, however, were met with a heat that was far harsher, a searing, inescapable reflection of every lie, every mocking glance, every act of betrayal they had committed. As she passed the first house, the merchant who had cheated countless villagers froze mid-step. The eyes embedded in her scars opened fully, staring directly at him. He felt the weight of every deceit he had perpetrated, every false balance, every coin he had taken unfairly. A vision flooded his mind. He saw himself mocking a poor customer years before, laughing as they left empty-handed. The shame pressed upon him with unbearable intensity. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling, unable to hide or look away. The girl's presence did not punish physically, there was no blood, no fire, but the truth of his actions burned hotter than any flame. His entire body shook and tears streaked down his face, drawn by the unyielding demand of conscience. Elsewhere, the stepmother's house shuddered with the weight of judgment. She had spent years mocking, belittling, and undermining the girl, and now the eyes bore into her soul. Each scar pulsed with light, projecting visions of her cruelty, forcing the girl to labor endlessly, laughing at her grief, even destroying small things that brought her happiness. These visions played before her as if the village itself were watching, and for the first time she understood the depth of pain she had caused. The sensation was unbearable. A fire of guilt consumed her from within, but it was not violent, simply undeniable. Her knees buckled and she clasped her hands to her face, wishing she could erase the memories, wishing she could hide from the eyes that saw everything. Some villagers fled in panic. The heat of truth chased them through the streets, a force they could neither outrun nor ignore. A father who had once lied about his harvest to appear wealthier ran into the forest, hoping the trees would shield him. But even in the shadow of ancient baobabs, the eyes found him. Each blink projected another memory, another betrayal, until he fell to his knees, confessing aloud to deeds he had long denied. Others ran into their homes, slammed doors and barred windows, but the visions reached inside, slipping through cracks, seeping into their minds. No lock could contain the judgment, no walls could shield them from the unbearable clarity of truth. Meanwhile, the innocent felt the eyes differently. A young girl who had once feared the cruelty of the village saw only a gentle shimmer, a comforting glow that washed over her heart. A kind old woman who had quietly offered food and shelter to those in need, felt the warmth of acknowledgement, a silent blessing that affirmed her choices. For them, the eyes were not punishment, they were witnesses recording the goodness that often went unnoticed. The innocent realized that while the guilty burned in reflection, those who had acted with integrity were held in light, protected and honored by the very power that brought judgment to the wicked. As the night deepened, the girl moved methodically, ensuring that no sin went unseen. Every mocking glance, every whisper of ridicule, every act of secret cruelty was mirrored back to its source. The villagers were forced to confront not just what they had done, but who they had become. The eyes did not condemn for sport, they revealed the depth of human folly and cruelty in stark clarity. No one could deny what they saw. The weight of revelation pressed upon them, bending their knees and opening their hearts to repentance, or, in some cases, terror that would follow them for years. The stepmother, now on her knees, began to sob openly, recognizing the breadth of her misdeeds. She realized that no apology could erase the pain she had caused, yet the visions offered a chance for acknowledgement. Her shame was palpable, and her repentance began as quiet mutters, whispers that floated in the night air, but it was the first act of submission to justice. The merchant, still trembling, vowed to change his ways, his voice breaking as he promised fairness for the first time in decades. The village elders, who had turned blind eyes to cruelty, felt the pressure of responsibility for their inaction. They could not flee the light, could not hide behind tradition. They were compelled to witness and to act. Children too were affected. Those who had been unkind now felt the weight of conscience pressing upon their young hearts. The visions of cruelty, once abstract, became immediate and personal. Tears ran freely and apologies were offered, sincere and unprovoked. The girl's presence ensured that the cycle of cruelty would not easily repeat. Her scars, now luminous and purposeful, held the power of moral reckoning, an invisible tribunal that judged without bias, without bloodshed, yet with unassailable authority. By dawn, the village had been transformed. Those who had fled returned cautiously, humbled by the night of revelation. The guilty carried a new understanding of justice and the inescapable nature of truth. The innocent, strengthened and affirmed, would now serve as witnesses to the power of conscience and compassion. The girl herself, her task complete, stepped to the river's edge. The eyes on her scars dimmed to a soft glow, satisfied for now, having fulfilled their purpose. The water reflected her image, no longer merely a girl with scars, but a guardian of moral balance, a living testament to the power of observation and truth. The night of judgment had ended without violence, without fire and without blood. Yet its impact was profound. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of the eyes that had seen everything, of the unbearable visions that had forced confession, of the radiant justice that had been carried by a girl who once bore only wounds. Some fled in shame, others repented, and all were forever changed. The lesson was clear: cruelty and deceit may be hidden, but they can never escape the watchful gaze of truth. The eyes in her wounds, once symbols of suffering, had become instruments of justice, revealing that moral reckoning does not need swords or fire, it only needs the unblinking vision to expose every lie and every act of cruelty for all eternity. By the first light of dawn, the village was eerily quiet. The night had been one of revelation, judgment, and awakening, and now a soft, misty glow enveloped the streets, reflecting the somber mood of the people. The girl, whose wounds had carried the eyes that unveiled hidden sins and bore silent witness to cruelty, was nowhere to be found. She had vanished without a trace, leaving only the memories of the extraordinary night behind. Her absence was felt immediately. The villagers, both guilty and innocent, instinctively searched the streets, the alleys, and even the surrounding fields, hoping for a glimpse of her luminous presence. But there was nothing, only the gentle whisper of the wind, the soft murmur of the river, and the quiet rustle of leaves in the morning air. What remained were her footprints. Unlike ordinary footprints, these bore an unusual and unsettling sign. Each impression in the dirt and soft earth contained a tiny, faint eye looking upward, unblinking and watchful. These eyes seemed alive, holding within them the same power and judgment that had radiated from her wounds the night before. They stared at the villagers as if reminding them that the reckoning was not yet complete, that every cruelty and every kindness was permanently recorded and could never be hidden. Children who ran barefoot to inspect the prints stopped in awe and fear, feeling the weight of invisible attention. Even the elders, hardened by years of governance and experience, felt a chill as they traced the trail with their eyes, sensing the spiritual significance of each step she had left behind. The forest beyond the village became the epicenter of mystery. Birds paused mid-song, animals tread softly, and the trees seemed to lean ever so slightly toward the path she had taken, as if acknowledging her passage. The footprints led into dense groves, twisting paths, and thickets where sunlight barely reached the ground. Every step seemed to radiate a silent hum of power. Those brave enough to follow the path noticed that the eyes embedded in the footprints occasionally flickered faintly, like stars in a morning sky, giving the sense that she had infused the land itself with the presence of her gaze. This subtle, mystical trace was enough to instill both awe and fear in any who dared approach. Stories began to form immediately. Villagers whispered that she had not merely vanished but had become something more than human, a guardian of conscience and justice. Mothers told their children that the girl was now watching over the village from the forest, ensuring that cruelty and deceit would never again go unpunished. Fathers warned their sons that even the smallest acts of malice could be seen by eyes that never closed. The legend grew with every telling. The girl's disappearance was not a retreat but a transformation, a crossing from the mortal world into the realm of the extraordinary, where her spirit and power would endure beyond the limitations of flesh. Yet her legend was not merely one of fear, it was also of hope and guidance. The villagers began noticing subtle changes in the forest, gentle breezes that felt protective, soft glows in the undergrowth at twilight, and the occasional shimmer in the river that mirrored the eyes she had left behind. These natural signs were interpreted as her continued presence, a silent reassurance for those who had remained kind, that their goodness was recognized and valued. Farmers began planting their crops with small rituals of respect to her memory, leaving offerings near the edge of the forest to honor her vigilance. Women and girls who had once been timid felt strengthened, knowing that her spirit lingered, protecting and watching over those who could be unjustly harmed. The guilty, however, could feel no comfort. Even in her absence, the psychological weight of the previous night's revelations pressed upon them. Merchants, neighbors, and former mockers walked cautiously, their steps slow and deliberate, aware that the eyes had not abandoned them entirely. Some awoke in the middle of the night, convinced that a faint shimmer or a soft whisper in the wind was the girl's gaze reminding them of the truths they had been forced to confront. Even when their eyes were closed, they imagined the subtle blink of 1,000 tiny eyes scattered across the village and beyond, a persistent echo of judgment that could not be ignored. The footprints into the forest became a symbol of the permanent consequence of cruelty, a reminder that moral reckoning did not require her physical presence. It lingered in the land itself, in the memory of the living, and in the legend that now wove itself into the culture of the village. Over the years, the tale of her disappearance became intertwined with the landscape. The forest was respected, almost revered, by all villagers. Travelers entering the area were warned to tread lightly, lest the watchful spirit of the girl notice their misdeeds. Seasonal rituals developed. Small fires were lit along the edges of the forest, and offerings of food and flowers were made to honor the eyes that observed justice. Children would press their palms to the earth, looking for the faint glimmer of a footprint, and elders would nod knowingly, passing down lessons of empathy, respect, and vigilance. Her legacy extended far beyond her lifetime, teaching every generation that cruelty left marks that could never be hidden, and that justice might arrive silently, like a whisper carried on the wind, or persist through the land itself. Even as centuries passed, the village maintained the story, embellishing and enriching it, but never losing its core truth. The girl's disappearance was neither an end nor a loss, it was a metamorphosis. She had become the eternal observer, a presence whose justice transcended mortal limits, embodied in the forest, in the river, and in the whispers of the wind. Scholars, bards, and travelers recounted the legend far and wide, describing the footprints with faint eyes as evidence of a spirit who could see all deeds, good and bad. Parents recounted the tale to children not merely as a story of supernatural power, but as a moral compass, demonstrating that cruelty and deception left traces that could never truly be erased. By the time the sun fully rose, painting the village in golden light, her absence was complete, but so was her imprint. The footprints remained, eyes gazing upward, a subtle yet permanent reminder that she had passed through, and that her watchful presence would endure forever. The girl had vanished, yet she had left behind a world changed. A village transformed by fear, respect, and the enduring memory of a young woman whose wounds had seen too much, and whose disappearance had elevated her into legend. Her spirit became inseparable from the landscape itself, a moral force woven into the very earth, ensuring that every act of cruelty or kindness would be observed, remembered, and accounted for in ways no mortal could ignore.